and welcome everyone to our session today on Microsoft Excel for managers and leaders, or leaders and managers, whichever direction you want to say that. I am excited to talk to you about some of the great features that are built into Microsoft Excel. Some of these you may be aware of, but not quite sure how to use them. Starting with our first topic today, named ranges. Named ranges is a feature built into Excel that allows us to select a cell or a range of cells and actually give it a name. So if you're familiar with how Excel works, it's called Excel because we talk about cells. When you click on a cell, it always gives you the name of that active cell located at the top left in what is called the name box. So that's at the top left here, just underneath the ribbon on the left-hand side there. Right now I happen to be on cell B3. Well, what happens sometimes when we are working in this application, we want to be doing formulas that are going to be using multiple columns, cells within a column or cells within a row, those kind of things. And we are continuously having to go back and keep selecting the same things over and over again. Or we create a formula that we want to reference a specific cell and be able to copy that formula down for multiple rows or columns, but to lock down that cell, we have to use dollar signs, technically called the absolute reference. Well, those kind of things can be controlled by using named ranges. So named ranges allow us to actually select the cells and give it an actual name, a text name. That name should describe what exactly is in the cell or the range of cells to make it easier for you to know what content it is. They have a lot of benefits, makes the formulas easier to create, makes formulas easier to read because we're not seeing dollar signs, which can be confusing to end users. Plus, it's using the text instead of a range of cells in the formula, which make it so much easier to understand formulas. Also, we can use it for navigating, whether we want to use a named range as a hyperlink to navigate throughout the workbook, or we want to use it just to move from one place to another within the workbook, which I'll give you a short demo on how that works for us. So I'm going to start with creating a named range within this worksheet that I'm on right now called KPI Performance. And basically what I'm going to do is to select all the cells in this range. And I want to use row 1 as the names for each of the cells within each column. And I can do that super easy just by selecting that range, which, by the way, I did that with a keyboard shortcut. I did Control A, and when you're clicked on a cell within a range, it selects that entire range for you. So it's a lot easier than clicking and dragging. But anyway, once you have your data selected, one way, because of course there's multiple ways to do this, one way to name the cells is let the computer do the work by going to the Formulas tab of the ribbon. You'll find this Defined Names group. And on the bottom right of this group is this command called Create from Selection. If you click Create from Selection, it looks over your data and it says create names from the values in. So it assumes we want to use the top row, and we could use the left column to name each row. Well, we don't want the left column, so I'm going to uncheck that. I just want it to use the top row so that I don't have to keep selecting these columns to create formulas. So I'm going to leave it as top row. I'm going to click OK. That's all we have to do. It's that easy. So let me show you what it just did. Now, how do I know what it did? Well, if you go to the name box, you can actually click on that drop down at the top of the right in that name box. There's a down arrow. Click that down arrow and you're going to see a list of all the named ranges. If you click on any of these, like I just clicked region, it automatically selects that range of cells that is part of the region column. So now it's ready for us to use with formulas. So I want to demonstrate a few formulas, and I'm going to use those named ranges. But before I do that, I do want to mention that there is another way to create a named range. Just for brief purposes, I'm just going to click on cell K1. And let's say that I wanted to have a sales, sorry, I can't type, sales goal. And I want to say that the sales goal for all the salespeople is going to be $45,000. I could put in this sales goal and have a heading to it and then have the value and go to L1 and name that sales goal. So if I click in the name box, this would be another way to name a range, but it's more for one name, not multiples like the first example. But if I'm on L1 where I have my value, I click in the name box, I can then type in the name I want to give it. The key to giving it a name is you can't have any spaces in the name. You can use uppercase, lowercase, up to 255 characters, use an underscore, or use uppercase, lowercase to separate words. That's the easiest. After you type the name, press enter. That's it. It's now named. Now, the best part about that is I can use that in any worksheet to create a formula. Let me show you. Let's say that I go to the worksheet called budget transactions, and I want to create a formula based on that sales goal. I can click on a cell, and let's say that I just want to do equal 1,000 divided by, equal 1,000 divided by sales goal. I put in the first part, and I'm going to start typing SA. As soon as you, of course, start typing letters, it brings up a list of functions that begin with those letters. Like if I just do an S, you can actually see a list of the functions that begin with the letter S. But a function has the circle with the FX next to it. A named range actually has squares with the blue. So you know what the difference is. If I double click on sales goal, do Control Enter, here's my answer to my formula. So I don't have to be on the sheet. By default, when you create a named range, it's available across the scope of your entire workbook. Just so you know, you could do that. Now, I'm not really going to keep that formula. I'm going to get rid of that. But what if I need to get back to the KPI performance worksheet? If I go back to that name box, click on the drop down and click department as an example, it's going to navigate me directly back to the worksheet that named range came from, and it selects the cells that are a part of that named range. So here I'm back into the KPI. So just so you could see a few examples of that. But let me actually use these in a formula. I'm going to start with an if function as an example. So let's say that out of this information here on this KPI worksheet, we want to know, is the KPI on track? Something we need to watch, or is there a problem? We could use an if function that would look at the actual, and it can look at the to see if it's greater than or equal to the target. And if it is, we can have it say on track. Or if it's false, we can have it say something like needs review. So what I'm going to do is go to cell I2 so that I can actually copy this all the way down. So maybe I want to name this column though. KPI, I'll name it KPI on track. And I'll put a question mark because we're actually answering a question. So I want to know if the KPI is on track. I'm going to make this a little bit wider. So I'm basically going to do equal the letter I. I can either double click on if, or I can press my tab key because I'm on it on the drop down menu. And I have a suggested formula that popped up, but I'm going to not pay attention to it for it right now because it's actually assuming what it is that I might want it to do, but I'm going to ignore that. And basically what I want to put in this formula, if you look at the screen tip underneath, first it wants to know what is the logical test. So what do I want it to actually look at? Well, I want it to look at the actual, which is G2, and find out if it is greater than or equal to, and then I want it to actually look at F2, which is the target. So I want to know if the actual is greater than or equal to the target. Comma, to separate the arguments, I want to put in what do I want it to do if that is true. And then I put in a comma and put in what do I want it to do if it's false. So I want it to say on track if it's true. And because it's text, I need to put it in quotes. So I'm saying on track, and then I'm doing a comma, that if that G2 is not greater than or equal to F2, I want it to actually say needs review. So I'm going to type in needs review, which is once again going to be, it's going to have the quotes around it. So basically what I put in that formula is greater than equal to, so looking at G2, the actual, to see if it's greater than or equal to the target, and if that was true, it's going to say on track. If it's false, it's going to say needs review. Now, I didn't capitalize the N. I could go back and fix that in my formula bar here if I want it to stay consistent. I'm going to Control Enter again to complete that, and now I can copy that formula all the way down by just going to that fill handle at the bottom right corner of the cell. I can double click and it will automatically copy that all the way down. So I'm basically stating that I want it to look at this cell and compare it with this cell, and if that's true, do this. If it's false, do something else. So very common for leaders and managers to actually use an if function. So that's one formula that I wanted to kind of demonstrate for you today. But another one, I'm going to go to the worksheet called Budget Transactions. And the next formula that I'm going to do is actually going to be another if function. But I'm going to do what is called a sum if S. So let me break that down first. So sum if is a function that we can say that if this is true, add these numbers together. And we could tell it what numbers to add. So an example is, if the region is west, I wanted to add together all of the amounts. That would be an example of using a sum if. So we could do that if we wanted to. We could just go to a cell and type that in. I could say equal sum if. It wants to know what range do I want to work with. I could choose region, and because I don't have that as a named range, I would have to select the cells. Then I could say the criteria is going to be the word west, which because it's text, it has to be in columns. Then I could tell it what is the column that I want to add together, which happens to be the amount of H2 through H221. Then I could control, oops, sorry. I misspelt the word west. Let me fix that. Sorry about that. And let me put in my range of cells that I wanted to add together. So what I wanted to add together is the amount column. Now I'm going to do Control Enter. So what this did, just to take you back to what I started with. So if I want to say if in the region column, it says the word west, I want it to look across over to the amount column and add those numbers together. It's a way to get a subtotal based on all the west region. That would be a way that the sum if works. But another example is using the sum if S, so that we could actually say that, because what if we wanted to know how much did IT spend in the West? So how much did the department IT spend in the West? So based on the amount, based on the department, and based on the region. A sum if S, anytime you have a function with an S at the end, it means multiple criterias. Now, before I create this, I don't like to have to go back and keep selecting the ranges of cells to create the formula. So I'm going to name the ranges. So I'm going to click within the range of cells. I'm going to do the Control A to select that entire range. I'm going to go back to the Formulas tab. I'm going to click Create from Selection. I wanted to use the top row to name those. I'm going to click OK. Now each of these columns are named based on the heading at the top. Now when I create a formula, I won't have to sit and click and drag to select those columns. So I'm going to go back to N2, and I'm going to do another sum if with the S at the end. So I'm going to do equal SU. I'm going to double click on sum if. So this is going to allow us to put in multiple criteria. But the order of how things go with this, when you look at the little screen tip, first it wants to know what is the range of cells you actually want to add together. In this example with an S, we put the range we want to add at the beginning. With just a regular sum if, it's at the end. So just so you know, it's a little bit different. Always look at your screen tip. So what I want to tell it is I want to add together the amount. Now I'm not going to select the range. I'm going to start typing A. I'm going to double click amount so that it knows that's the column that I want to add it together. I'm going to put in a comma and it wants to know, well, first off, what is the criteria range that I want to use? Well, the first criteria range is the department. So I'm going to type a D. I can't see the E, so I'm going to put in an E, and I'm going to choose department, comma, I need it to know what is the criteria from that department range. It's going to be the word IT. So I'm going to put in quotes, IT, quote. And by the way, you don't have to capitalize that. It doesn't care in a formula if it's uppercase or lowercase, just so you know. So that's the first criteria. But I have more, so I'm going to put in a comma again. And then this time I wanted to look at the region column. So I'm going to add in region. I did RE. I'm going to double click region. I'm going to do comma, and I need to tell it exactly what is the criteria for the region. That's going to be West. So I'm going to put in quote, West, quote, and that's the end. I could put in other criteria if I wanted to also narrow it down to say that it was, Microsoft in the vendor column. We could continue with more criteria, but I'll stop at that criteria and do a Control Enter. Oops, sorry. Sorry. I have a name error because I misspelled. Oops, why does my mouse keep doing that? My keyboard and my mouse are not working together. So let me actually back up on that. Let me go back and do that over here because I want you to see the correct way. So sorry about that. So I'm saying sum if. I want it to look at the, region is 1. So I wanted to look at the region. And I want the region to actually be West because it can go in either direction. Next, I'm sorry. I'm doing a sum if S. So sorry. That's my fault. And I need to tell it what range I wanted to add together first. I'll break this apart for you in a second. Then I want it to be using the department. So I'm going to choose department. And then out of the department, the criteria is going to be IT. So let me explain this formula now that I typed it in correctly. So basically, I did a sum if S, S meaning I wanted multiple criteria. The first thing I had to put in was the amount. I wanted to add together the amount column. Then I put in the first criteria range, which I wanted the region. And out of the region, I wanted it to be the word West. Then the second criteria range was the department. And out of the department, I wanted it to be IT. So it added together all the amounts that match looking across. If it says West IT in the department and West in the region, it's adding that amount column together. So these are just some great functions that you can be using every day depending on what it is you need to analyze for your information. Now, one more example on these counting or on these if functions that I want to do for you. And let's say that we have service desk tickets. I'm going to go to this worksheet called service desk tickets, and I'm going to go to cell N1. And let's say here we want to count if the service desk tickets have how many high priority tickets are still open. So we have a status column that has closed, resolved, in progress, new, that kind of a thing. So I want it to be looking at if the priority column is high and the status column is in progress. We want it to count how many of both of those match. So this again is going to be a 2 criteria. I'm going to tell it that I want it to count cells if they match 2 criteria. First criteria is that the priority column says the word high. Second is that the status column says in progress, as an example. So I'm going to start with equal COU to narrow down the functions. I'm going to double click count if S. Then you can see from the screen tip, it's really looking for what is the first criteria range. I want the first criteria range to be priority. So I'm going to start typing priority. Oh, I did not name these cells. Sorry. I didn't name these cells, so I'll have to select them. I do have a habit of always naming my cells, by the way. So I'm going to manually have to go back and select the range of cells. So I'm going to go from E2, shift control down arrow to go to that bottom of that column. So that's my first range. And I'm going to put in a comma because I need my criteria of being the word high. So I want it to look at column E. And if that is high, that's what I want for that first criteria. Comma, I now want to put in my second range of criteria, and that's going to be the status column. So I need to select the cells because I don't have them as a named range. So I'm going to start on H2. I'm going to do shift control down arrow all the way through H1, 8-1. I'm going to put in a comma, and the criteria in quotes is going to be in progress. So I wanted to look at both of those to come back and tell me how many, based on these rows of data, have a priority that is high and a status of in progress. And it came back with a number of 10. So these are things that you can be using on a very regular basis. But there's one more type of function that I want to do. And that's actually going to be a lookup function. We're going to do a lookup function that can look up information out of a range of cells. So I'm going to my sales operations worksheet. And from here, I want to be able to look up the record ID. And from that record ID, I want to know a deal is flagged, who owns it, and what is the value. Now, we have a couple of different ways that we can actually do this. We can use what is called a VLOOKUP, or we could do an XLOOKUP. I'm going to do an XLOOKUP because an XLOOKUP has extra features built in that we cannot do with a VLOOKUP. A VLOOKUP, if I want to look up multiple criteria, I want to look up multiple columns of information based on a record ID. I would give it the record ID, then I would have to tell it what is the range of cells I want it to look in. Then I would have to count the columns across with a VLOOKUP to find out which column is going to give back the answer. I don't like to have to count because what if I have 100 columns going across? I don't want to have to do that. So instead, I'm going to do a XLOOKUP. An XLOOKUP only looks for what column do you want me to look in to find the lookup. So in this case, it's record ID. And then which column do you want to have me bring the answer from? So if I say look up record ID SO30129, and I wanted to bring back the region or whatever, it's going to be able to do that super easy. But I'm going to take this a little bit further on the example. And first, I'm going to actually name my ranges of cells because of the fact that, you know what, I want all of these as named ranges. Now, I'm going to go into the name manager here real quick just to show you something. This record ID, the date, they are actually part of the budget transactions because we have duplicate names. It's you might want to have the fields be different because otherwise the scope when you create it is going to be just based on the worksheet. So just so you're noticing that I can have multiple of the same name if one is available for the entire workbook. But otherwise, if I create these as named ranges and that name already exists, that named range is only going to be available in this worksheet, just so you're aware of that. So I'm still going to create the named ranges by going create from selection. I just want to use the top row. I'm going to click OK. Then I'm going to come over to N1 and I'm going to create a formula. Well, actually, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy these column headings and I'm going to paste them over here because I want to have the headings to match up with what the results are that we're looking up. So I'm going to take a record ID, just copy one for an example, and I'm going to paste it over here. So what I want it to do then is I want it to find the date, the region, the segment, the product line, the stage, all of that corresponding information on these other columns. Now I could tell it, I could go to region as an example, and I could say I want to find this record ID out of column A, and I want you to bring back the region, so that would be column C. I could do something as simple as that. But I'll do that with the date. It won't come out formatted as a date, but we could always change the formatting. I'm going to do the date first. So I'm going to do equal X. I'm going to double click on X lookup. I'm going to say, so if you look at the screen tip, first it wants to know what is the lookup value. I'm going to say I want to look up the record ID. Comma, it wants to know, well, where is it going to find that lookup value? It's in the record ID column. So if I start typing record ID, you can see that record ID has worksheet. That's the one that I want. I want it to look at the worksheet record ID, not the other one coming from a different worksheet. Comma, what it wants to know now is what's the column that is going to be the answer I want to get back. That's going to be date. Now, of course, there's multiple date named ranges, so I'm using the one called date worksheet because I want it just from this specific worksheet. And I could stop right there. I don't have to go any further, but as you can see, there's other arguments within this formula that I could do. I'll show you an example of one of them in this next example, but I'm going to control enter and it's going to automatically bring back the date that was entered. Now it's not formatted as a date, but let me format it as a date. So it's automatically matching the date based on the record ID that I wanted it to look up. But if I'm doing a VLOOKUP or this XLOOKUP, if I just do it the way that I did it, I'm going to have to repeat that for every one of these other columns. I don't want to have to do that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually use the XLOOKUP again, but I'm going to do the rest of them all at one time because you can do that with an XLOOKUP. Can't do that with a VLOOKUP. So on O2, I'm going to do equal X. I'm going to double click XLOOKUP. I still have the same lookup value. I want it to look up the record ID, comma, I want it to look up M2, the record ID, comma, it's going to find it in column A, which is record ID. So I'm going to start typing that, and I'm using the record ID from the worksheet, comma, it wants to know, well, what is the return array? Well, I want multiple columns to be returned. So I can actually select the range of cells that I want it to return. So I want it to return the region, everything all the way over, but I didn't have it as a named range, so I have to select it. Now, of course, I could have done that a little bit quicker, but that's okay. I want it to return all of these cells. I'm going to add a comma to this because what I really want it to do right now is, I'm going to control up here. I want it to actually go to the next argument. If you look at the screen tip underneath, the next argument is if not found. Do I want it to come back with a generic error if it doesn't find the lookup ID? I'm going to say, quote, ID not found. I don't want it to come back with a Microsoft generic error. I want that error to come back. So now when you look at the results, it automatically populated everything going across. So I don't have to do a next lookup one column at a time. I can do a range of them all at once. And if I go to the record ID and I change this and it's not a valid one, the first date, I didn't put in the error code, so I get an NA error, but otherwise it's going to say ID not found because it wasn't a valid ID. If I undo that and I have a valid ID, I get the results of everything. So great options to be using. I think that those are very important features that you can use. Now, the next example that I want to quickly do is conditional formatting. I feel that conditional formatting is a feature that should be used regularly. Matthew, did someone have a question first, though?
Yeah, someone's wondering why sometimes you're using Control Enter versus just enter, the enter button alone, and sometimes you're double clicking. So maybe if you could explain what the difference between the different formula input options are.
I'm so glad they asked.
Yeah.
So the Control Enter, you know how normally you type something in and you press Enter, you move down one cell. Well, if I don't want to move down, you do Control Enter. Control Enter completes what you were typing but keeps you on the same cell. And then another shortcut that I was doing was when I started typing text in a formula, it brings up that list. And to have it, get the average if or whatever I want, I double click on it so it automatically types it in and gives you that required left paren. So that's why I do that. Otherwise, I'd have to go down to it.
Yeah, so the result of enter and Control Enter is the same other than you stay in the cell that you were just working on with Control Enter.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you so much, Jolene.
Absolutely. Great keyboard shortcut. So basically what I want to do here is I want to be able to highlight in the KPI on track, or let's say that it's the status column. This would be a good example for the status column. Here in the status column, if it says at risk, I want to have that be identified. I want to really have that stand out. Conditional formatting is a great way to do that. So I'm going to select H2 all the way down to the end of that column by doing Shift Control down arrow. Another keyboard shortcut I use regularly. Now that I have those cells selected on the Home tab of the ribbon, I'm going to go to the Styles group and click Conditional Formatting. We have a lot of different types of conditional formatting that we can use. I could say highlight rules, I could do top-bottom rules, but I am going to use highlight rules for this first example, and I'm going to say text that contains. So it's going to look at the cells, and if the text matches whatever I type in, it's going to automatically turn it whatever color, the formatting that I choose. So I actually want that to be at risk. So I'm going to start typing at risk so that every time it sees at risk on the right-hand side, it's going to do light red fill with dark red text. I'm going to click OK. So that is a great way to have that stand out. But if that status changes, it's no longer at risk. Let's say that it changes to monitor. It's going to automatically remove that conditional formatting because it no longer matches the condition. Now, I'm actually going to apply a second condition to that same range of cells. So I'm going to start on H2, Shift Control down arrow, select that whole column again. I'm going to go back to conditional formatting. I'm going to actually go to icon sets. We have data bars, we have color scales, but I'm going to go to icon sets. And you can see that I have all these different icon sets that I could use, but they're not text related. So I can't manually, I should say automatically, have them be added. I can only do that with a number. But could I still use icon sets for this text? Actually, I could, but I would have to create a new rule. So very quickly, I'm going to click Create Rule, and then I'm going to tell it what it is that I want it to do. I'm going to say I could use cells, format only cells that contain. I could say format cells that are hired, blah, 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 that kind of a thing. But I'm going to keep it on this format cells that contain. So I'm going to go to cell value, and I'm going to say if it's equal to, and then I'm going to put in the text, at risk. And then what do I want it to actually use for formatting? Well, I'm going to click Format, and then I can choose that I want it to be bold. I could choose a font color. Whatever it is that you choose, you can have it do. So just so you could see, I could go to the borders, I could have it apply a border, I could go to the fill and change the fill color. Whatever it is that you want it to do, you can manually set things up, or you could use things that are going to be automated. So like if I'm in numbers, and I'm just going to go back up to the top here, and let's say that I'm in the target column, and I'm going to select all those cells. If I'm doing something based on numbers, I can actually use data bars, color scales, or even icon sets, just so you could see that these could be used. But with text, they don't necessarily use those. They're based on numbers by default. So anyway, conditional formatting is a great way to have things stand out, especially if you're going to be working with dashboards. But before we get too far here, I do have another topic that I want to talk about, and that's actually pivot tables. There's some additional information in your handout that we don't have time to get to today, but just so you're aware, I felt that they were things that I wanted to keep in the handout, but I want to demonstrate things that are more important. Like pivot tables. So I'm going to go to this budget transactions worksheet, and let's say that I want to create a pivot table that I don't want to just filter to say I only want to see departments. I want to be able to have a unique list of every department, what region they're in, and what their total amounts are for all of these budget transactions. I would do that in a pivot table. I would never do that manually. A pivot table is going to be more automated. Let me show you what I mean. If we go to the Insert tab of the ribbon, I'm going to click on the icon from the left-hand side in the Tables group for Pivot Table. It opens up this dialog box selecting my range of data. I'm going to tell it that I want to keep the pivot table on a new worksheet. I'm going to click OK. So what it does is nothing is really in the cells, but you use the right-hand side to actually create the pivot table. So if I want to have department, here's a unique list of departments in column A. If I go to the right-hand side and click on the box in front of the name of that field. But if I want it to be region, I could uncheck department, add region, or I can uncheck that and do category. Whatever you want in the pivot table, it's a matter of clicking the box or unclicking it to remove it. So I'm going to do department. So now I have my unique list of departments, which that's pretty cool just on its own. But I also want the amount. And anytime that you add by default a number column to a pivot table, it's going to automatically add it as a separate column, and it's going to do a sum. So it just did subtotals. Based on all of that budget information, the budget transactions, this is the department information and a sum of the amount. Now I could go to A3 and put in department because I want to identify that that's the department column. Sum of amount really makes sense because that's exactly what it is. It's a subtotal of the amount, and so I'm okay with that. But what if I need other information? Now, right away, this is pretty cool because it's linked to the original data sheet. We can refresh the pivot table to have it automatically update if the information changes on the original sheet. Formulas could have been done. but it would have been much more difficult, especially when we do things like this. If I go to the right-hand side and I say, you know what, I need to know what category or what region that department is in. If I click region, it adds an alphabetized list of all the regions in column A indented under the department. Then it automatically will give us the subtotal for each region based on that department. So I can see that central for customer success is, you know, 26,000, I can't talk, $26,370.77. But the total amount for the customer success was the 50,000. So this is a great way to be able to look at this information very quickly in a pivot table. But what if I want these regions to actually be sorted highest number to lowest number? I could right click on any of the numbers in column B for the region. So I'll right click here. From this pop-up menu, I can go to sort, and I could say sort largest to smallest. So now this list is sorted this way instead of alphabetized. By default, it alphabetizes each, like customer success, engineering, field services. So each department in each region was sorted that way. But now it's sorted by the highest number in that group. All depends on what it is you need. Now, also, to kind of talk about this full realm, I could do another pivot table and add it to this worksheet. Because what if I want this to become my dashboard, where I want to be able to see one sheet with a summary of all kinds of other information? I want all of my budget transaction information to be on this dashboard. I'm going to go back to the budget transactions. I'm going to create another pivot table. I'm going to go to Insert Pivot Table, but this time I want this pivot table to go on an existing worksheet. I want it to go on sheet 1, and I want it to actually start on, let's say I want it to start on L3, just to show you. I'm going to click on that for this location. I'm going to click OK, and I now can create a new pivot table. Maybe for this pivot table, I need the vendor and the amount. Now I have a unique list of all the vendors and all the amounts. Great. Great, easy way to do things. And what if I want a chart to go along with these vendors? First, let me name this vendors, so you can identify things a little bit better. By the way, if I want to format the numbers for the sum of the amount, I could right click, go to number format. I could choose the formatting that I want it to use, click OK, and it automatically formats those numbers in the pivot table. But what if I want to be able to filter these different pivot tables? Because I don't always want to see every region. I don't always want to see things for all the date ranges. We can actually apply slicers and timelines to help us filter this data, especially on a pivot table. I'll show you what I mean by that. So first off, I'm on this first pivot table that I created, and this was based on the department. So I'm going to go to the ribbon, to the Pivot Table Analyze tab. On the left-hand side, I'm going to name this pivot table. I'm clicking in the box where it says Pivot Table 1, and I'm going to name this Department Amount, just to uniquely identify. Oops, I didn't spell department right. Let me spell that correctly. To uniquely identify that information. I'm going to click on the other one, the vendors one. I'm going to do that same thing. Go to the pivot table name. I'm going to name this vendors amount and press enter. So both pivot tables now have a name to them because they are a named range. But I'm going to jump back to this first one again, and I want to add a slicer so that I can use it to filter any of my fields, even if I don't see the field. But I want to filter by region. So I'm going to go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab. In the filter group, I'm going to click Insert Slicer. I'm going to choose region. I'm going to click OK. It automatically gives me this little slicer window with the unique values for every region. I can move it around because it sits on top of the cells. It's an object. I could even go to the ribbon where I have a slicer tab when I'm on it, and I could change the color of the slicer. I can also change the height, the width, whatever it is that I want to accommodate the need. How does it work? Well, what if I only want to see all of the departments and based on South region? I click on it and it filters that pivot table to only show the information based on South. If I go to the top right of this slicer window, click on this filter with an X icon, that will clear the filter and bring back all the records. But I want to add one more filter option called a timeline. Timeline filter windows only work with dates. So back onto the pivot table again, back up to the pivot table analyze tab, I'm going to click insert timeline. From there, I'm going to choose the only date field that shows up called date. I'm going to click OK. And I now have this timeline that I can click and drag and move anywhere. I have this slider bar down at the bottom that I can scroll left and right to see different years and different months depending on the date ranges that you have. But if I want to just see information based on March of 2025, I click the blue bar under March and it just filtered that month, which it didn't really have any records for that month. If I click May, it brings back the records for just May. If I click July, I can only see the information based on July. So it's looking at all of the budget transactions, whatever the date was for those transactions, we can filter by. Now at the top right, I'm going to clear the filter to bring back all the records again. And I'm going to click where it says months on this timeline because I want it to be quarters. We could do years, quarters, months, or days. So what if I want first quarter of 2026? I go to the blue bar, click on first quarter of 2026, and it filters that automatically. So we can be doing filters by using these simple slicers or timelines. It makes it so much easier when you're in a dashboard situation that you want to be able to analyze this data, which, by the way, you can have multiple pivot tables that are connected to these slicers and timelines. Let me clear the filter from this timeline, and I want the other pivot table to be filtered by the same slicer and timeline. If I'm on the timeline, I can go to the timeline tab of the ribbon. On the left-hand side, I'm going to do report connections. It's already connected to the work or the pivot table called department amount. I also want to connect it to vendors amount. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click on this slicer for the region. I'm going to go to the slicer tab of the ribbon. On the left-hand side, I'm going to do the same thing, report connections. It's already connected to the pivot table that I named department amount. I'm going to select vendor amount and click OK. Now, how is it going to work? Well, if you look at column M, where it has Amazon at 45,000, look what happens if I just do South region again. Amazon is now at 7,800 and it filtered the other pivot table as well. So one slicer can work with multiple pivot tables. What a fantastic way to do a dashboard. So we can have as many slicers as you need for the fields you want to filter by. You could have as many timelines as you have date fields, and you can use them on multiple pivot tables on one sheet. Now, can you use pivot tables coming from different sheets? Yes, but we can't slice them all at the same time. Only the ones that are coming from basically the same information, just so you're aware. Now, what if I wanted to have a chart to go along with these vendors so that as we are filtering, it also updates both pivot tables and a pivot chart? I'm going to clear this filter from region. I'm going to click on the pivot table that I want to base the chart on, which is vendors. I'm going to go to the pivot table analyze tab. I'm going to go to the right-hand side and click pivot chart. I can choose the type of chart that I want. I'll just keep it on clustered column for right now. I'm going to click OK. I can move that pivot table anywhere I want it to go because it's an object just like the slicer and the timeline. I can move it. I can use my chart tools that are on the ribbon, like the design tab, if I want it to look different, whatever formatting we want, whatever objects we want to turn on or turn off, all of that is going to be available. We could use those tools from the ribbon like you normally would with a chart. But does it work? Well, first let me do a quick layout. And let's say that I just want this. Nice, clean, easy to use. Let's say that I want to filter by central region. If I click central on that region, it just updated both pivot tables and it just updated this chart. So watch the chart because I'm going to clear that filter. So right now this chart only goes up to 25,000. Let me clear that filter. Now it goes up to 70,000 on the chart because now it's based on the data that it's filtered by. Pretty cool that we have this capability of having everything work together. So we can have pivot tables, we can have charts, we can have whatever it is that we need based on the same slicers and the same timelines. I think that having the capability of doing this is essential for leaders and managers. Everything that is in your handouts, everything that we've demonstrated today is really things that all leaders and all managers should know how to use. So just to recap, highly recommend if you have not been using named ranges. You saw some examples of how to name the ranges and how to use them. Highly recommend it. There are so many times that I need to select a million rows down in a column and keep doing that over and over again. I don't want to have to do that. And I want the formula to be easier to read. I want to be able to look at it in the formula bar and understand what it is. Plus, it's an absolute reference. So named ranges have a lot of benefits to them. So my recommendation is if you're not using them, start today. Start using them today, 100%. Then we talked about all these different types of functions. We did an if, we did a sum if, we did a count if, and we did the S with it so we could have multiple criterias. Because a lot of times it's like, great, I have this one criteria. I just want to, count how many records are the East region. That's great. But if you want to throw in East region plus being this department, that's when you need the S. So you want to take advantage of the functions that are going to work best for what it is you need to analyze. We also talked about the lookup functions. Mentioned the VLOOKUP, didn't demonstrate it because I highly recommend learning the XLOOKUP. I didn't give you a ton of examples on it, but you could always go to the Excel help on the ribbon. Lookup XLOOKUP, you can get tons of examples so that will help you to understand how it works a little bit better. And like I said, it has multiple options, arguments to it that we didn't discuss, but let me tell you one of them. A lot of times in a VLOOKUP, people want to say, I want an approximate lookup, where if I have a range of numbers and that number is not on the lookup list, it will drop down to the next lowest value. That's all a VLOOKUP can do. An XLOOKUP could look lower or higher. So it's a lot more intelligent. It has more to that, but just wanted to let you know that. So highly recommend XLOOKUPs. And of course, you definitely want to know how to use pivot tables. If you want to just play with pivot tables, have them go on a new sheet. You can always delete the sheet when you're done. You don't have to keep it. Okay, so I'm really hoping that you picked up on some tools that you can take back and start using right away, because I think these are very essential options that all managers and leaders should know how to use.